What exactly are the protective measures that NATO is employing to guard the globe against the perils instigated by Russia and China? This inquiry has long been a subject of intense deliberation. The fundamental goals of Russia and China are undeniably evident. Both nations aspire to elevate their financial growth throughout the Baltic region and the Arctic, while establishing an authoritarian dominion stretching across the world, encompassing both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. It is precisely under these circumstances that NATO is focusing its attention on the Baltic states and Scandinavia, areas perceived by Russia and China as their primary theaters of operation. This international military alliance aims to impede the collaboration between Moscow and Beijing, particularly within the Nordic sphere. The recent inclusion of Finland and Sweden within the NATO alliance has already been an attempt to counteract these serious risk components. However, NATO understands further measures are needed. The collective emphasis of the international military alliance's members has entirely pivoted toward the Nordic territories. The Nordic alliance members have become extremely alarmed at Russia and China's access to regional resources. Therefore, the Nordic group, steered by 4 nations, has robustly highlighted NATO's deterrence capabilities by creating a unified air shield strategically positioned to defend against potential threats from Russia and China. These countries include Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Rather than operating separately within their distinct airspaces, these nations have opted to function as one singular unified military entity entrusted with ensuring security within a region comparable in size to Brazil. Finland is demonstrably at the forefront, with its well-equipped military, evidenced by the transition from FA-18 Hornets to F-35As. Meanwhile, Norway is contributing F-35 fighters and cutting-edge radar technologies. Denmark is actively modernizing its fleet with F-35As, and Sweden is enhancing its fleet of domestically manufactured JAS Gripen aircraft. This formidable air power establishes a gold standard for regional security cooperation within both NATO and the Arctic. We shall now delve deeper into an examination of how the Nordic group intends to deploy this combined air capability against Russia and China, assess the aggregate number of fighter jets and air assets the alliance possesses, and also explore how this integrated strength impacts the Moscow-Beijing partnership. But before we continue with this, kindly make sure to subscribe to our channel, enable notifications, and like this video to receive more content. Now let's begin. The integrated Nordic Air Command has effectively transformed Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark into a singular unified air force geared to fortify Northern Europe's defenses against resurging Russian intimidation. This flexible basing of over 250 aircraft accentuates intelligence exchange and collective command infrastructures. When we examine the individual contributors to these integrated air forces, Finland will always be given the top position. The Finnish Air Force currently manages FA-18C Hornets and will continue to maintain these active airframes until the United States fully delivers 64 F-35As. Helsinki's substantial purchase order for the F-35As stems from the imminent threat posed by Moscow, as Finland shares the most extensive border with Russia among the NATO member states. Out of the 4 Nordic countries, Finland is currently perceived as the most prepared for any potential conflict. It possesses the largest conscript reserve army on the continent, one of the most expansive artillery arsenals in Europe, and enhanced air defenses. It is quite plausible that the Finnish Air Force is actually the most important element of the Nordic Air Command. Now let's turn our focus towards Sweden, the latest to join NATO following Finland, and recognized as a key participant of the unified Nordic force. Sweden maintains a very strong level of influence. Unlike their American-made fighter counterparts, Stockholm locally produces the Gripen C and D variants. Furthermore, the J-39E now serves as the Swedish Air Force's leading fighter. While Finland, Norway, and Denmark have fully transitioned to the F-35, Sweden prefers to invest and develop its Gripen's capabilities, adding the Flag System 2000 over the upcoming decade. Despite its dissimilar aircraft configurations, the Gripen operates as effectively as any US-made aircraft. And, like Lockheed Martin, Saab has expanded its customer base due to its constant technological advancements. Stockholm could be seen as the Steve Jobs of the Joint Command Center. Moving on to Norway, it's become incredibly clear just how much of a deterrent NATO's strength has become within the Nordic region. The Royal Norwegian Air Force currently has 34 operational F-35 fighter jets. The Air Force uses 6 extra F-35 fighters to train fresh pilots, and also for crucial maintenance and logistical assistance. For the training of crew and enlisted personnel, Norway has also established its personal Joint Air Operations Center in Sisa to further assist all airfields, thereby ensuring mission success. By incorporating modern apparatus, such as the P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft and numerous F-35 Lightning II fighter jets, the Oslo government has modernized the Air Force to a point where it can respond to any possible crisis. Norway, with its TP-4 radar system, is well regarded as NATO's eyes in the north. Against the backdrop of Russian aggression, Oslo is reassessing its military capabilities, acknowledging that Putin's objectives may not be limited solely to Ukraine. Because of this, Norway's contributions to NATO's Air Force are expected to continue into the future. Immediately after Norway, we'll take a look at Denmark. The Royal Danish Air Force, which is crucial to the unified Nordic Air Force, is presently operating 30 F-16AMs. Denmark also maintains a stock of 8 F-35A jets and is presently anticipating orders for 13 more of these fighter jets. Despite its population of only 5.9 million, Denmark has cemented its status as a highly significant NATO member in terms of per capita income. The Copenhagen government intends to allocate a considerable portion of these revenues to military funding. This will enhance the deterrent ability and overall strength of the unified Nordic Air Force in the near future. Within a few years, these 4 countries will form a formidable air shield, which will protect the Baltic states against the Russian threat. As early as 2024, prior to the start of the new year, the Nordic force highlighted its capabilities. Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden conducted their first large-scale test of their joint command as part of Exercise Nordic Response 2024. The exercise, which was conducted in northern Norway, focused primarily on aerial superiority via the use of joint command and control, and with the support of naval units. Nordic Response was a massive achievement, and the Joint Air Command has since expanded its operational scope into the Arctic, where China and Russia are concurrently attempting to broaden their influence. With the addition of China into the equation, the Joint Air Command among Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, thus demonstrating Nordic interoperability, is vital for NATO and Northern Europe. In a world that is marked by continuous change and conflict, the Nordic countries are showing the importance of being prepared for war, while simultaneously maintaining a composed diplomatic approach to promote peace across the globe. As long as the Joint Nordic Air Command is maintained, viewed as the foundation for global peace across the Baltic states and the Northern Arctic, the aims of Russia and China will not come to fruition. So, when did this entity, the Joint Nordic Force, first materialize? And what exactly has been the history of this alliance? Back in the early 90s, members of the region contemplated the notion of a joint Nordic Air Force. Although Finland and Sweden were neutral at this point, the governments of both Helsinki and Stockholm maintained solid relations with NATO members and established competent defense industries. Today, with both Finland and Sweden joining NATO, integration has now become much easier. This has enabled the Joint Air Force to strengthen its fundamental basis. On March 16, 2023, the commanders of the Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish Air Forces signed a declaration which established the Joint Nordic Air Command with the goal of deepening collaboration among their respective air forces. The commencement of the Joint Nordic Air Command enhanced the defensive measures in Helsinki, Stockholm, Oslo, Copenhagen, and across Northern Europe against any renewed imperialist threats from Russia. Progress continues as NATO's European members form mini-blocs within the organization to improve regional accountability and create solid lines of defense throughout the collective defense alliance. With Norway and Denmark, sharing intelligence can become much more common and far greater. The objective of the Nordic command structure is to enable versatile air bases within various countries, enhance air exercises for officers, and integrate more powerful command and control structures. Of course, while NATO is in the process of forming this joint air force, the threats being instigated by Russia and China within the region are far from eliminated. Both countries are particularly turning toward the Arctic to undermine NATO and essentially remove the Scandinavian geographical element from the game. expanding Russian and Chinese cooperation within the Arctic was evidenced in July of 2024 with a substantial naval exercise and maneuver involving 9 Russian and Chinese naval vessels on a joint patrol across the Pacific Northwest. In another historic event that same month, 2 Russian bombers and 2 Chinese bombers flew directly into Alaska's Air Defense Identification Zone and were intercepted by both US and Canadian fighter jets. Some scholars have argued that Russian and Chinese collaboration is actually still rather limited across the Arctic, primarily driven by expediency and economic interests. However, these views of Arctic exceptionalism disregard the growing geopolitical rivalry, largely driven by Russia's supremacy in the Arctic as opposed to NATO. The transformation of the Arctic into a strategic battleground was explicitly acknowledged back in June of 2024 via the U.S. Department of Defense's Arctic Strategy, which highlighted the rising levels of cooperation between both Russia and China. This came about because Russia continued to expand its military presence and actions throughout the Arctic. The unique setting of the Arctic necessitates specialized training and equipment, thus creating further challenges for the United States to both project and maintain its military forces in the region. This task was further complicated by the U.S. strategic focus on counteracting China within the Indo-Pacific. NATO presented an ideal form of burden sharing in the Arctic, which allowed the U.S. to focus its energies elsewhere. Despite the Trump administration's rhetoric to the contrary, as it shifts its focus back to Asia, maintaining strong NATO relationships remains vital. Since 2019, NATO has linked its strategic survival to the Indo-Pacific axis. Therefore, the Trump administration will need to rely more on Arctic military power to deter both Russian and Chinese ambitions. The U.S. military has minimal forces capable of operating within the Arctic, but it also must defend its space-based infrastructures throughout the area. The United States can ensure a consistent Arctic presence and maintain a strong military position within the Indo-Pacific, especially by using the Arctic knowledge of its British, Canadian, and Scandinavian allies. Being the only area across the globe where Russia and China are functioning in close proximity to North America, U.S. cooperation with the Nordic powers is critical to the overall dynamics in the region. Melting sea ice and advancements in technology have increased accessibility, thus changing the Arctic from a strategic buffer zone to a highly desirable location for valuable resources such as oil, gas, rare earth minerals, and new fishing grounds. It has even opened up shorter sea routes between both Europe and Asia. This increased accessibility unlocks enormous economic potential, which includes an estimated 90 billion barrels of undiscovered oil, 30% of the world's untapped natural gas, and $1 trillion in rare earth minerals. Russia and China also recognize this impressive opportunity for wealth. The opportunities that are seen by the two countries are bringing about intense competition, with both the growing Chinese and Russian presence directly challenging both US and NATO interests. The Arctic has long been integral to Russia's identity and security, which controls 53% of the entire Arctic coastline. The Russian regime's Arctic policy is driven by both economic and security needs. The Arctic is absolutely vital to the Russian economy, making up for 10% of Russia's GDP and 20% of its total exports. Russia has expanded its military influence by reopening Soviet-era bases, deploying advanced missile systems, and investing greatly into nuclear-powered icebreakers. The Kola Peninsula, home to the vast majority of Russia's ballistic missile submarines, underscores the role that the Arctic plays within Russia's nuclear deterrent strategy. Furthermore, by trying to control the northern sea route, Russia directly challenges international norms of navigational freedom and poses a serious threat to NATO's northern flank, as well as the economic interests of its member states. On the other hand, China's Arctic activities are further complicating the entire security landscape. Despite not being an Arctic nation, China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is working to increase its influence through its Polar Silk Road initiative. These efforts frequently give bilateral support to military objectives. Sino-Russian joint Arctic exercises, which include Coast Guard and maritime patrols, as well as joint bomber patrols, are a testament to the increasing military challenges to the United States. By combining Russia's military presence with China's economic and technological capabilities, they create a strategic challenge for NATO. as well as the defense of the American homeland. Converging Russian and Chinese interests, both within the Arctic and beyond, necessitate that the United States work with, and via, allies to counteract these threats across the region. Traditionally, the U.S. has enjoyed unparalleled military dominance, but throughout the Arctic, it now faces an emerging alliance between two formidable rivals. American dominance cannot be taken for granted, the Sino-Russian alliance aside. In the Arctic, U.S. capabilities are not sufficient to counter Russia, given all the implications. Successful military operations within the Arctic not only require specialized equipment, but they also require specialized training and doctrine for polar warfare. Arctic operations are exceptionally challenging due to complex logistics, extreme weather conditions, and seasonal variations, such as polar days and nights. Therefore, building Arctic-ready forces requires dedicated training, as well as the development of Arctic military knowledge within cold weather conditions. Lessons learned from previous Arctic conflicts include the ongoing necessity for cold weather warfare training, as well as specialized polar warfare doctrines, joint operational interoperability, mobility in the Arctic's harsh conditions, and also plans for increased supply and unique logistics. These courses additionally include Arctic domain awareness and intelligence, space weather that disrupts command and control, unique Arctic weather conditions associated with polar days and nights, the control of Arctic maritime lines of communication, and maintaining unity of command. Fortunately, NATO already has much of the necessary infrastructure within the Nordic countries. For example, the British Joint Expeditionary Force was formed in 2014, placing importance on Arctic combat capabilities with Nordic military forces throughout the High North. More recent advancements include the establishment of a NATO multi-corps land component command in Finland, the creation of a Nordic Air Force, and the creation of a NATO Baltic Command Task Force in the German port city of Rostock. All of these reflect a major increase in NATO's cohesion, capability, and communication, thus helping to establish a better deterrent force around the Arctic Circle. Furthermore, the Nordic countries are jointly negotiating the procurement of an infantry fighting vehicle specifically designed for the subarctic climate. Finland's experience in Arctic warfare dates back to the Winter War, when, thanks to its superior tactics adapted to the unique Arctic environment, it effectively held off a numerically superior Soviet invasion force for longer and better than expected, and ultimately lost. Finland's contributions to NATO include significant ground forces and long-range fires. Likewise, Norway hosts the NATO Center of Excellence for cold weather operations. Sweden's recent addition into NATO has further strengthened the alliance's aerial capabilities and also its industrial base, while Denmark's Joint Arctic Command provides critical assets, experience, and capability. Canada has long been an important U.S. partner in the Arctic as part of the binational North American Air Defense Command. Denmark is also considered one of NATO's game changers in the Arctic against Russia and China. Now, with the Joint Nordic Air Command, NATO's power in the region will become much more deterrent and layered when compared to Russia and China. Thank you for watching. Reminder, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. There's more to come. First-minute retention notes. The rephrased opening remains highly engaging and detailed, aiming for that 70% plus retention. The use of stronger language and more descriptive phrases should draw the viewer in from the start.